Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of your favorite podcast, The Fantasy Birds. Back with co-host Tom Hickson. How are we doing today?
We're doing good. We're doing good. It's not as overcast in Baton Rouge as it's been the last couple of days, so I'm feeling the sunshine.
So what you like to see coming into February of 2021. What's good, everybody? Today we're getting back to some player rankings. We did a couple 2 weeks ago, just updating you on some risers, fallers, see how everybody around the league's been doing. We'll start as anybody else would at the top five. No change here in the top five. Jokic, Doncic, Antetokounmpo, Harden, and Durant. Not much to be said here. These guys are dominating points leagues, basically any format really, except for Giannis because of that field goal or free throw percentage, maybe in category leagues. But points leagues, these guys are top of the notch. Doesn't get much better than them. Only thing I would say about these five, maybe James Harden, more volatile, I would say, in a Brooklyn Nets uniform as he's gotten 60, 70 some nights in points leagues and then 40, 30 in others. So not as consistent as he was in Houston, but still putting up big numbers there from the top five. Nothing to complain about. So let's head into our next slide, which is 6 through 12. And who here sticks out to you from these players?
So the first thing that really sticks out to me, I think Nikola Vucevic was one of the steals of the draft in the early month of the season. And while he's still putting up really good numbers, I think you're starting to see some of those numbers that he was putting up come back to earth just a little bit. He's obviously still a really good fantasy producer. He's gonna be reliable every night. But you're starting to see some of those numbers for him decrease. Recently he would get you at least 40 every night. Last few games he's gotten 39. Had a bad game with 14. We can write that off. Had 39, but again, like we're kind of, it sounds a little ridiculous that we're kind of criticizing him for it. But when you get this high in the rankings, you kind of have to start splitting hairs a little bit. Kind of like what we were doing with Harden in the top five in the previous slide. So again, it's just about splitting hairs. But Vucevic has been down a little bit. I think Bradley Beal also we do have him as a slight dropper just because obviously the Wizards games have been they're very unpredictable, so therefore that can cause some uncertainty, as well as we know that the Wizards are not in any rush to trade Bradley Beal, but we look at what's been going on recently with some of the performances or lack thereof from the Washington Wizards. I think that can cause some disgruntled player issues, some team chemistry stuff. I think there's a potential for him to get traded by the deadline, and no, it hasn't been something that's been front and center. I think it could potentially happen. I just think that's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I agree there. Wizards getting a big victory over the Brooklyn Nets last night. Maybe that helps Bradley Beal's case in not getting traded, but definitely a lot of frustration coming from Beal and his agent and everything.
His wife on Twitter, by the way.
Oh yeah, his wife
she's
definitely
been going at it.
How the Wizards have been playing, even though Beal's been balling. So if the Wizards can get this going, start getting some wins, trade rumors go away, Bradley Beal definitely going to be top guy in the league. But really, only there is if he gets traded and if that affects his fantasy value. But everything else holds true this slide. These balling out. Karl Anthony Towns, we expect him back from COVID this week. That's why he's getting a little bump in the rankings. Should be around top five, top six if everything goes to plan. And other than that, Damian Lillard, without a CJ McCollum, without a Yusuf Nurkic, this dude is absolutely going nuclear. Dame time, first quarter to fourth quarter, putting up absurd amount of points, trying to carry that Portland Trail Blazers team into the playoffs. But let's move on. Let's go to our next slide. And we got Russell Westbrook and Kyrie Irving as our risers on this slide. What can you tell us about some of the guys listed here?
So we've talked about Brooklyn, and obviously when you have three guys that are relied upon to be essentially first round picks in fantasy formats, you want to know that they can produce. While Kyrie Irving's ceiling might be capped on a night to night basis, just because he's not going to get as many looks as you originally thought with the Harden trade, it's going to be a little bit volatile, just because when you have 3 stars like that, some nights they'll take turns and you'll get the back and forth, you'll get the shuffling. But overall, other than that, Kyrie Irving has been pretty consistent over his past 5 or 6 games. He's gotten in 5 out of his last 6 games, he's actually scored in the 40s for total points. Is that what you would want out of a first round pick? You might want a little bit more, but there's still sufficient numbers, and he's still giving you solid value. So at least what we know so far is that we can expect that there won't be a giant drop in production. Speaking of not a giant drop in production either, I'm looking at Andre Drummond at 15. I know a lot of people were worried about his potential ceiling with Jared Allen capping off some of his minutes. And there's been a couple of games where we've seen that be the case. But for the most part, it's been back to same old with Drummond, him putting up numbers in the 40s and even the high 50s on one occasion. So I still think Andre Drummond's ceiling might be capped a little bit just because of minutes, and they have so many bigs in that rotation that they're trying to get all the minutes for the trees that they have in Cleveland. But ultimately, I still think Andre Drummond's going to be a reliable fantasy asset, and I don't think the Jared Allen trade hurts him as much as we originally thought.
Yeah. Drummond definitely not losing as much value as we thought with the Jared Allen, but the main concern for Drummond is a potential buyout, and then if he is to move to a Brooklyn Nets or a different team, how is his minutes going to play out there? Something to watch out for. But Russell Westbrook, definitely someone to keep an eye on, coming back from that injury, having 2 decent games, nothing special, a lot of turnovers in the first 2 games back. Last night against the Brooklyn Nets, going nuclear, as we like to say, against his former teammate Kevin Durant. Maybe some bad blood there, what have you, but getting a big victory for the Washington Wizards. Russell Westbrook, if he can keep this up, even not playing back-to-backs, probably the only reason he's not in the top 10, for being honest, but his numbers are definitely look to improve as he gains more health and more confidence after his beef with John Wall in that Rockets game. He's been absolutely insane. Let's keep it moving. We got Ben Simmons as one of our big risers on here. What can you tell me there?
So Ben Simmons has really picked up his production recently. There's a saying I just like to kind of repeat ad nauseum about certain players, but it kind of held true with Ben Simmons, that the idea of Ben Simmons in the fantasy realm is the idea of Ben Simmons is a lot better than the reality of Ben Simmons. And recently, much to the pleasure of Ben Simmons owners, he's kind of reversed that recently. He'll still have games where he'll get you 25 or 30. Two of his past 6 games have been as such. However, in those games that he didn't score 25 and 30 against Detroit and Minnesota, he came back with 45, 48, 59, and 48. Those are numbers that you can rely on night in and night out, and that's what you're looking for from Simmons, because despite a guy who has a stat line where he's averaging 13, 8, and 8, he'll get you steals and blocks. He's a terror in transition. You would think that he's the type of guy that would give you reliable production, but that's kind of far from the case. Recently, he's picked it up. He's been more consistent as a scorer. He's just been producing better recently. So I think that's very encouraging. And then also touch briefly on Jimmy Butler. I know you'll probably have something you want to say about him too, but given that we were both very high on Jimmy Butler being a buy low candidate, even when he was balling out, I think his averages were skewed by the time missed for injury and the struggles early in the season. But Jimmy Butler's been out of this world recently, so I think he's another guy to keep an eye on. Christian Wood would be a name that I would just circle as a potential. Maybe he can drop a couple spots, but I think Christian Wood will be pretty solid as well, because he has the tendency to rack up statistics even when they don't mean much. But hey, listen, fantasy ain't real life, and you're just here to collect statistics, and that's what we're doing.
Totally. The key here for me is guys returning from injury / COVID absences. Jason Tatum, Christian Wood, John Morant, Jimmy Butler. John Morant coming back against the Spurs looking very nice. We expect him to get back to his production for that Grizzlies team. Hopefully they get their games played in the coming weeks. Jason Tatum looking good coming back for the Celtics too. And then Christian Wood, a little underwhelming, as you said, only putting up points and rebounds, not really getting the assist numbers. You see only 1 assist per game. It's not really his game to do that, but you like to see a little bit more numbers outside of points and rebounds if he's going to continue to be a top 25 points leagues player. So maybe a little bit of room for improvement there from Christian Wood. But Malcolm Brogdon's still one of the steals of the draft, 4th, 5th round pick, doing very well, very efficient for that Indiana Pacers team. Maybe if TJ Warren and Karis LeVert are able to come back potentially at the end of this season, his numbers drop off. But until then, I don't see why Malcolm Brogdon can't sustain this value going forward as long as he stays efficient. Also, Pascal Siakam recently getting it going for the Toronto Raptors. They had a very slow start, as you can imagine, for a team playing in Tampa, Florida, as opposed to Toronto, as they're accustomed to this season due to COVID. But Pascal Siakam, definitely his numbers have been improving, so you like to see that for late 2nd round pick guy. Let's keep it moving to our next list. We're starting with Bam Adebayo for the Miami Heat. That team's starting to get it rolling, and so is he, averaging a double-double, 20, 10, and 5. Very consistent player across the board, putting up almost every single statistic there is. So you got to love Bam Adebayo. What else stands out to you?
Clint Capella getting the bump in the rankings that he deserves for his recent performance. Like we've touched on before in previous videos. In a previous video, we don't necessarily expect his elite production to continue, but he absolutely deserves a bump up in the rankings after some of his recent performances that we've highlighted previously. DeRozan has been a dropper again. He's kind of a guy. He's not really going to give you much besides scoring, and the Spurs have had some recent recent trouble with COVID related games missed. I know they missed one against the Pelicans. Obviously, that's not necessarily his fault, but I do think as long as he's only giving you, he's a guy that obviously he's picked up his production in other categories. He's bumped up his assists to 7 per game, which is solid. It's actually very passable, but I do think his upside is capped a little bit, and I don't think he's a guy with a ton of upside necessarily. Another name to watch here is Brandon Ingram. Again, he's been scoring really well. He's been carrying that load for the Pelicans. However, the production in other categories, especially rebounding, is not exactly what you want to see, especially of a player that length. So that's why the numbers might seem a little bit more underwhelming than you would expect when you watch the Pelicans and he has such a high usage rate.
2 guys here that stand out for me, very similar players on the court. Clint Capella and Rudy Gobert, both long rim protectors, both averaging around 14 and 14 a game with a couple blocks sprinkled in. These guys are huge risers, averaging around 40 fantasy points per game in some format settings. Definitely 2 guys I might be looking to trade because I don't think they can keep this production going forward. Rudy Gobert, for that Utah Jazz team, on a 10, 11, 12-game win streak, whatever it was, just snapped by Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets. But definitely 2 guys performing well above where I think they end up at the end of the season. So keep an eye on them right there. And let's just fill out this list. Zach LaVine, Zion Williamson. Zion's been playing great, putting up a lot of points and rebounds, not much else, so that's going to limit his upside there. But definitely putting up solid numbers from those 2, Chicago Bulls and New Orleans Pelicans. Let's keep it moving. What sticks out to you for this list right here?
I think going back to the buy low, sell high video that we did, I think Jeremy Grant was a prime sell high candidate that we think was going to come back down to earth a little bit. He has done so. Last time we did a video about him as a subject, he was averaging about 39.6 points per game. He's down to about 37. His production has decreased a little bit. We still expect him to be a solid startable fantasy player, and there not to be huge issues going forward necessarily, but we did expect his numbers to decline a little bit. John Wall is a name that I've been kind of fixated on just because I think going forward, I think there's a real path to him putting up 40 points a night. I think that backcourt is really cleared up a lot between the James Harden trade. Obviously, you had the Chris Clemens injury in the preseason. It freed up a lot of minutes. And while Oladipo is there, I think John Wall has been in more of an attacking role, and we've seen him kind of flourish to some of his old self. De'Aaron Fox is also interesting because we had him as a buy low guy, and his production overall for the most part has increased since then. So I do think the early returns on that, if you bought in on some De'Aaron Fox stock, I think so far you probably like what you've gotten out of it. Who are some of the guys that you're seeing on this list right here that kind of intrigue you?
For me, it's got to be DeAndre Ayton and Gordon Hayward. DeAndre Ayton, a big riser for us, maybe a little bit too high looking back, but playing really well in the absence of Devin Booker. We'll see if he can keep it going when Devin Booker returns. But DeAndre Ayton, it looks like it's just a matter of if he's going to put forth the effort on a night-to-night basis. He's got the talent, number 1 overall pick over Luka Doncic in the draft a couple years back. His numbers are improving. If he can consistently play at a high level, put good minutes up, put good effort up on a nightly basis, he's going to do well in a Chris Paul-led offense, even with Devin Booker comes back. But definitely something to watch with guys rolling back to the lineup. And then Gordon Hayward for that Charlotte Hornets team, really becoming the guy for that team, the number 1 scorer, the guy they go to in the clutch, having a game-winning shot a couple games ago. And a Terry Rozier injury that might open up even more shots for Gordon Hayward. He's been very efficient with his shooting. That's probably going to regress a little bit, you have to expect. But as long as he's got the ball in his hands, the usage rate's going to be up, and the fantasy points are going to be there. So Gordon Hayward definitely looking solid for the rest of the year for that Charlotte Hornets team. Let's keep it going to round out our top 50. It's going to start with Kyle Lowry, Chris Paul, Drew Holiday, Donovan Mitchell, and Kristaps Porzingis. What are you looking at right here?
I'm looking at Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry, I as a Kyle Lowry owner in fantasy, I very much praised Kyle Lowry's consistency and how Kyle Lowry will get you between you. The variance isn't very high. You know you're going to get between 35 and 48 points a night from Kyle Lowry every given night actually. And then he had an injury a couple of weeks ago where he missed some time. He missed about 2 or 3 games, and then he came back and he hadn't looked right. He just hasn't looked right since he came back. Last night was a different story, so maybe he turned the tide a little bit, but he scored 48. He scored 48 points. He had 12 points, 15 assists, 2 steals, 6 rebounds. I mean, that's a good performance. He's played 37 minutes in his last 3 games. In each of his last 3 games, he's played exactly 37 minutes. So the minutes are going to be there. He's kind of trying to ramp back up from that injury, but again, he's kind of getting older. His recovery time, at least I'm guessing his recovery time, his ramp up period isn't exactly necessarily what it used to be. That must be my guess about what was going on, because in his 4 games coming back, he's gotten 14 fantasy points, which is not what you want from him. But then 26, still subpar, but not quite as bad. And then he had 48 last night. So hopefully the last game is more of what you can expect going forward. But given his recent time missed from injury and the 3 struggling games he had coming back from that injury, I think that's going to be a reason why he slipped in this rankings.
Definitely agree there. I'm looking at Chris Paul, kind of like what we said with DeAndre Ayton. Devin Booker's been out. Chris Paul's had to take the load, put it all on his shoulders, playmaking, scoring, you name it, he's doing it. Probably the highest his value's been all season. It might be the entire season rest of the way. So potentially a sell-high candidate right there with Booker coming back. But also I'm looking at Kristaps Porzingis really just being a stretch 4. He's not getting any offensive rebounds, not really getting in the low block at all on offense much. Not really getting the rebounds because he's always on the perimeter. So that's going to hurt him with his double-double potential not being as high as it used to be. Averaging under 10 rebounds a game, definitely not what you want from Porzingis. He's got to get that up if he's going to get back to around a 30, 40 overall player in fantasy. But Porzingis definitely dropping, especially with the rest days that the Mavericks have had for him. and trade rumors. So Kristaps Porzingis stock definitely falling pretty fast. But I expect him to be a little bit better. If you can get him cheap, definitely would go after him.
I totally agree. First of all, if you can get him for really cheap, if you have a really desperate manager, absolutely go after him. But again, we can go. I've said this before. We can go back to this. This is why I think by the nature of his game, he doesn't lend itself to huge production. Obviously, he's got the type of game where he can stretch the floor and he can do a lot of good things for a real basketball team. And he's very, and if you're trying to build a foundation, he's a good guy to start with. But I mean, yeah, his game doesn't lend itself very well to production. So that's why everyone was really excited when Kristaps Porzingis came back, and I was like, not so fast. So again, that's just my concerns recently have kind of just bared out a little bit, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, but look, that's going to wrap it up for our top 50 player rankings updated in fantasy basketball points leagues. We thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next time with the Fantasy Birds.